Our next speaker is Jonathan Wells, who is another one of our very highly educated scholars. He has a PhD in theology from Yale and a PhD in biology from the University of California at Berkeley. So we have so many college degrees among our speakers today. They have enormous research for the books that they have presented and a lot of good facts that you need to have when you take similar courses in college. The name of this book is The Politically Incorrect Guide to Darwinism and Intellectual Design. Please welcome Dr. Jonathan Wells.
Thank you, Phyllis. It's really an honor to be here and to be in the company of all these other authors. A minor correction, the book is The Politically Incorrect Guide to Darwinism and Intelligent Design. Phyllis said intellectual. I'm not sure that that's a big difference, but that's just so you don't go looking for the wrong book and maybe get a counterfeit imposter or something. Notice that my book is not about evolution. Evolution is not the problem. Actually, evolution means many things, most of which are non-controversial. Evolution can mean change over time. Evolution can mean an evolving constitution. Well, maybe that's controversial. But nobody disagrees with change over time, at least nobody I've ever met. Evolution can mean change within existing species. Again, that's not controversial. People were observing that and indeed producing it for centuries before Darwin came along. We didn't need Darwin to tell us about it. So the problem is not evolution. The problem is more specific, and that's reflected in the title of my book, Darwinism. Darwinism specifically is the idea that all living things are descended from a common ancestor by unguided processes, unguided natural processes, such as accidental mutations and survival of the fittest. That is Darwinism. Now, why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem for two reasons. One is it doesn't fit the evidence, so it's a problem for science. What sorts of evidence do you think of when you think of the so-called overwhelming evidence for evolution? Fossils, okay? Fossils are dead things that have turned to stone. They tell us some things about the history of life. But what fossils do not and cannot tell us is how they are related to each other. Imagine, for example, digging up two human skeletons, heaven forbid, two human skeletons in your backyard. There's no way you can tell how those two skeletons may or may not be related to each other. The only exception is if you get DNA out of them and the DNA is identical, then you've got identical twins. But apart from that, you can't tell how they're related to each other. And they're recent, and they're from the same species. When you look at fossils that are from millions of years ago, in some cases, from different species, there's just no way you can connect them in sequences of ancestry and descent. What you do, or what Darwinian biologists do, is they assume that Darwinian evolution is true, and then they impose that on the fossil record and somehow try to get the fossils to fit the picture. Even then, there's a problem. The fossils aren't that accommodating, and actually the fossil record in many respects is a big mess. We think of molecules as evidence for evolution. Well, we can use molecules to trace lineages within existing species, but I said that's not the problem. When we try to connect different species with their molecules, we run into problems. You've maybe heard that we're closely related to chimpanzees because we're 98 or 94 or 96 or 95.5% similar to them in our DNA. The numbers themselves are very slippery. But when you think, DNA has 4 subunits, 4 letters in its code. So any living thing with DNA is going to be at least 25% similar to us. So when you hear somebody say you're 90x% similar to a chimpanzee, you can say, well, I'm also 25% daffodil. It makes just as much sense, or no sense at all. Here's the ultimate problem for Darwinism. Darwin wrote a book called The Origin of Species. He claimed that he could explain how new species originate. And they originated, he said, by extending what we see happening within species to the creation of new species over millions of years. And what we see happening in existing species is variation and selection. Well, despite what you may have heard or been given the impression of in your classes, no one has ever observed the origin of a new species by variation and selection. They've tried, they've looked everywhere, they've tried to do it in the laboratory, they've watched for decades, they've done it with bacteria in which you can produce tens of thousands of generations in the lifetime of a particular scientist. And they have never seen the origin of a new species by variation and selection. So the starting point of Darwin's theory has yet to be demonstrated. And from there on, it's speculation. You may have heard that, well, we can mutate things and change their genes and produce new species this way. Again, this is false. I'm an embryologist by trade, and I know that I can do anything I want to, say, a fruit fly embryo, change its genes any way I want. In fact, it's been done. And there are only three possible outcomes: a normal fruit fly, a defective fruit fly, or a dead fruit fly. That's it. So the evidence for Darwinism is much, much, much weaker than you may have heard. The other problem with Darwinism is it's more than a statement about what happens in nature. Its claim to explain these things by unguided natural processes leads to the implication, and many Darwinists have made it, including Darwin himself, that one consequence of this is that the things we see in the world that appear to be designed are not. There really is no design in the world. It's an illusion. Human beings weren't created in the image of God. They weren't created in the image of anything. They just happened. This has serious implications for religion. Now, several speakers, or certainly our first speaker, spoke about the establishment of religion in this country. Well, actually, we do have an established religion in this country, and you can tell by reading the court decisions. And that established religion is, effectively, atheism. And Darwinism is the creation myth of this religion. And it's defended bitterly by its adherents, which is one reason why there's so much heat and so little light on this topic. When I wrote a book 7 years ago, also put out by Regnery, called Icons of Evolution. Didn't talk about intelligent design, which I'll get to in just a minute briefly. All it did was show that the evidences in your biology textbooks for Darwinian evolution are almost without exception either distorted, exaggerated, or actually faked. That's all the book was about. And it earned me an award, which I now have proudly on my wall at home, the most hated man in America. I don't know, maybe you guys are jealous, but we could share it. Johnny Cash is reputed to have said once, it's good to be hated by the right people. Well, I consider myself honored to be in the company of others who are also hated by the right people. But this is a very nasty battle. I printed out some stuff off the internet just a month or so ago on one of the big science blogs, stuff about me, which was so over the top, or maybe I should say under the bottom, that it was unbelievable. And I printed it out and I handed it to my teenage son without comment, just for him to look at. And he sat there and read it for a few minutes. And then he started to laugh because it was so absurd. And the hallmark of these criticisms is, first of all, they don't deal with the evidence. Almost never do you hear Darwinists deal with the evidence, or they deal with it in ways that have already been discredited. What they do is they go after persons. They attack the person. Now, as a former 60s Berkeley radical, I'm pretty thick-skinned. Yes, I'm sorry to say. I've repented. But I am thick-skinned, so I can take the abuse. But it's interesting to me that so much of it is personal rather than intellectually relevant. Now, what is intelligent design? Intelligent design is a new idea, about 15 years old now. It's fairly simple. Intelligent design says, in opposition to Darwinism, some features of the world that appear to be designed may actually be designed. Now, that's revolutionary. Darwinists consider this a real threat to our civilization. They've written to our civilization. not to their tenure or their research grants, to civilization. But all ID says is that some features may be designed. How do we tell? By looking at the evidence. Intelligent design says we can look at the evidence and determine whether something is better explained as a product of intelligence than as a product of unguided processes. Complexity is not the only hallmark here. Some people say some things are so complex they had to be designed. Actually, there's more to it than that. If I take a handful of Scrabble letters and I drop them on the floor, the pattern, whatever pattern they make, will be very complex. But I don't think anyone would say it's designed. The pattern itself is not designed. But if I take those same letters and I arrange them on the floor to spell out a sentence from Shakespeare, we don't even have to think about it. We immediately look at that and know that that's designed. So the pattern is not just complex, it's also what my colleague William Dembski calls specified. Specified, now that's a concept that's being worked out philosophically by design proponents. But in a living cell, it's not hard to understand. If you look at DNA, there's a code in DNA to make proteins. DNA is very complicated, billions of letters in one organism. But they're not arranged haphazardly. They're arranged to specify proteins, very narrowly, proteins that will enable a living cell to survive. That's the specification. So the argument for intelligent design is that we can look at the evidence from biology, and as I'll say in a minute, from astronomy, and see that some things are better explained by design than by unguided processes. But intelligent design says nothing about the Bible. It's not based on Genesis. It doesn't address the issue of the age of the earth. It doesn't say everything is designed. It doesn't tell us who the designer is. Personally, I believe the designer is God, the God of the Old and New Testament. But intelligent design doesn't get you there. It's very simply the statement, we can look at the evidence and determine whether something is better explained by intelligence than by unguided processes. And that alone is enough to provoke the rage of people who are so determined to defend their secular creation myth that they will not, at this point, even allow public discussion of an alternative. Kansas and Ohio, the last few years, passed curricula, biology curricula, science curricula, did not say anything about intelligent design. All the curricula said was that students should learn the evidence for and against Darwinian evolution. That was it. The newspaper said they were trying to teach intelligent design, but that's not true. Much less was it true they were trying to teach the Bible. They were just trying to tell students, you should know the evidence for Darwinian evolution. You should also know the evidence against it. The Darwinists, with help from their allies in the news media, misrepresented the issue, of course, publicly, as the teaching of ID or creationism. And by narrow margins, these people on the school boards in Ohio and Kansas were thrown out of office, and both states have now gone back to students will learn Darwinism, the whole of Darwinism, and nothing but Darwinism in their biology classes. So this is the power of the secular religion that has gripped our culture. I'm going to stop there, but not before I show you my ultimate victory over the Most Hated Man in America award, and that is a Starbucks coffee cup, which quotes from my book. I'll read you the quote. Darwinism's impact on traditional social values has not been as benign as its advocates would like us to believe. Despite the efforts of its modern defenders to distance themselves from its baleful social consequences, Darwinism's connection with eugenics, abortion, and racism is a matter of historical record, and the record is not pretty. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wells, and I hope you have provoked some good questions. His book is The Politically Incorrect Guide to Darwinism and Intelligent Design, and you're now connected with the Discovery Institute. Why don't you tell us what that is?
Well, thank you. The Discovery Institute, where I am a senior research fellow, Otherwise, I would be probably bagging groceries at a Safeway somewhere, because American academia will have nothing to do with me. Surprise, surprise. Anyway, Discovery Institute is a public policy think tank in Seattle. Deals with many issues: defense, economics, technology, Seattle area transportation. But the issue that has garnered it worldwide reputation is the Center for Science and Culture, which is the leading international organization studying and promoting intelligent design.
Good. Question?
The first part is, what's your stance on creationism? And the second part is, why do you think the ACLU is so against intelligent design in schools? Thanks.
Creationism, like evolution, is an ambiguous word with many meanings. If all creationism means is God created the universe and got the ball rolling, then Darwin himself may have been a creationist. But normally in the current controversy, creationism refers to those people who think that the first chapters of Genesis should be read literally, especially with regard to their chronology. I am not a creationist in that sense. My feeling is that the chronology is a matter of evidence, and I am not up on it. It's not my field. It wouldn't bother me in the least if the world turned out to be 10,000 years old, but from what I've seen, I think it's probably much older. But that's not part of the debate over intelligent design. Intelligent design does not address that at all. The ACLU, well, I think there are probably people here who know the history of the ACLU far better than I do. But it's no surprise to me that the ACLU should be defending at every turn the secular religion of American academia. It's not just that they're opposed to intelligent design. They are opposed to any criticism of Darwinism in the public schools. They will not tolerate it. If they think they can win a lawsuit on that issue, they do it. So it's not just intelligent design. You cannot criticize our religion.
Hi. How would you deal with an anthropologist who would use the existence of Neanderthals and Homo erectus, Homo habilis, and all those who use that as an excuse for evolution and Darwinism?
Okay, good question. Actually, the fossil record of hominids, as these are called, creatures that have features intermediate between us and apes, is a mess. You may have heard of Lucy, our supposed ancestor. Well, if you put on a grid between age and brain size the so-called ancestors of humans, Lucy is well on the way to being a chimpanzee, not a human. Neanderthals, which lived just a few thousand years ago, had larger brains than we have. So technically, they were more evolved. They were more advanced. So that screws things up right there. And then recently, you may have heard of these hobbits who were found in Indonesia, recent human beings, and apparently they really were human beings, about half the size that we are, with much smaller brains. Now, technically, they should be way down in the ape lineage, and in fact, they're modern humans. So the fossil record, even assuming Darwinism, the fossil record of hominids is a mess. One student of this, who actually is a senior science writer for Nature, who is a thoroughgoing Darwinist, he doesn't question Darwinism, but he acknowledges that trying to put these fossils into some sort of ancestor lineage relationships is scientifically no better than a bedtime story.
I have a question regarding the scientific nature of intelligent design. And because while I certainly appreciate it and agree with it from a philosophical standpoint, I have trouble seeing how it meets the criterion of falsifiability, which I think is necessary for good science, in the sense that due to its very nature, you could never devise an experiment that could possibly ever prove it false. And I was wondering what you think about those sorts of notions regarding intelligence.
Good question. Let me begin by saying most of the claims of Darwinism are not falsifiable by this criterion. But when we turn to intelligent design, falsifiability. The term, I think, originated, or at least was made popular by Karl Popper, who said that the hallmark of a scientific theory is that you can find evidence against it. Any idea you propose, according to Popper, you can come up with all kinds of evidence for it. I mean, astrology has evidence for it. But if it's an idea that you can't prove wrong, then it's not scientific, according to Popper. Okay, and this is debated by philosophers of science. There's a lot of problems, Because, for one thing, if I said, the moon is made of green cheese, well, that's falsifiable. It has been falsified, but it's a scientific claim, according to Popper. So there's a problem with the criteria. But when we look at ID, intelligent design, if I say that the specified complexity of DNA, for example, is best explained by an intelligent cause, that could be falsified if I could show, or somebody could show, that that specified complexity can be caused by random genetic changes and natural selection. And people have tried to do that, and they've been unable to do it. So there we have a testable statement. Another statement by Lehigh biochemist Michael Behe is about irreducible complexity in cells. Irreducible complexity refers to the idea that some features of cells only work when all the parts are in place. If you take away one part, the whole thing stops. Well, natural selection can only work on things that operate, that function. So it can't put the parts together. The parts have to be there before evolution kicks in. And Behe points to several things that have this quality. Well, various people have tried to show that the things he claims are irreducibly complex are not irreducibly complex. And so that's another area where the evidence is brought to bear on ID claims.
Hi. I have found that when visiting museums and zoos, you're just bombarded with a lot of evolution. In fact, the Natural History Museum here in town has an evolution theater. And I feel that this is a tremendous stronghold that Darwinists have in indoctrinating our youth. And I was just wondering if you have any practical ways that we can combat this and win back our culture.
Well, certainly for me as a parent, the most direct way is to educate my kids. My daughter and son have both gone through the public school system, but not without some prompting and coaching from me. Also, I prompt them and coach them to be very cautious in what they say. But we do have to pay attention to our children and try to educate them the best we can in the face of this massive indoctrination effort. The other thing I'll say is when you look at the sources of funding for these places, and this ties into the theme of this entire meeting, it comes from us. All of this is taxpayer funded. Guillermo Gonzalez, whose family fled Cuba years ago, is an astronomer at Iowa State University, was recently denied tenure because he wrote a book in his spare time arguing for, which I didn't get to actually, arguing for intelligent design in the cosmos, put out by Regnery, by the way. Because he wrote this book, even though his publication record is better than his other colleagues who are up for tenure, he was denied tenure. And it's clear from the record that it was this book that torpedoed his chances. This is a public university, supported almost entirely by taxpayers of Iowa and us, the federal government, to the tune of billions of dollars every year. And I think it's up to us to educate the American people to realize how they've been hoodwinked into paying for this huge propaganda machine, including the National Museum of Natural History.
In Pennsylvania, in the Dover School District case, the ACLU was able to persuade the court to censor intelligent design, any mention of intelligent design in the school district. I'd like to comment on that, but I'd like to suggest maybe a different approach. If the courts are going to censor any mention of intelligent design, how about trying this, trying to persuade a school board to shut down the public school for, say, a half a day a week and allow the parents to come in for that half day a week. The school is shut down, and the parents can introduce concepts of intelligent design and abstinence and all sorts of other conservative ideas to the students because the public school is shut down, and then a court can't do anything about it.
Well, that's the first I've heard of that. I have to think about that. Let me say about this Dover decision in Pennsylvania, which was the end of 2005. It actually, I could have spent 20 minutes just on that because it exemplifies many of the themes of this meeting. Here, a federal judge took it upon himself to adjudicate a local education dispute in such a way that he essentially decided for the whole of our culture that intelligent design was not science. Well, Discovery Institute has analyzed his opinion and found that something like 3/4 of it was lifted almost verbatim out of the ACLU's closing remarks. It misrepresents the trial record because he misquotes advocates of intelligent design, including Mike Behe, and yet he decided intelligent design is not science. Well, why is a federal judge deciding what's science and what's not science? I mean, this is ridiculous. And besides, the opinion is just bad even on its merits. Discovery Institute did not actually advise the Dover School Board not to mandate. You know what the Dover School Board did, by the way? It said students should hear a statement at the beginning of biology classes, one class. Darwinian, this is not verbatim, but Darwinian evolution is a controversial theory. If you want to learn about an alternative idea called intelligent design, there's a book about it in the library. That was it. I mean, I quote the whole thing in my book, but that's about it. And the ACLU just jumped on that. But the ACLU has also jumped on school boards, as I say, who just want to teach students that there's a problem with Darwin's theory and say nothing at all about intelligent design. So your idea, I have to think about it. I've never heard that proposed before, but, you know, I think our public schools are in dire need of something to open this indoctrination logjam.